Some folks over here. All right, round of applause for our first-timers up top. Oh, and by the way, up top, folks, I will take this part out of order. We are having a raffle tonight for a, goodness gracious, our executive director just told me the brand name and I've forgotten it already. Grav Labs and some Willie Nelson coffee, and there are forms, I believe, down here at the table, so please come down and register for that. She's going to be getting up in about 30, 45 minutes or something like that, and by the time she gets up, the drawing is going to happen. So if you're not entered into the raffle already, you won't have a chance for all the goodies that we're giving away tonight. All right. Who here, by a show of hands, that was my attempt to get folks to come downstairs, but that was a total and complete failure. Okay. Who all is here that's a member of Texas NORML? Fantastic. We're going to have Les Weiler come up and talk about membership, too, in a little bit. And just board members, if board members would raise your hands. Anybody who's new and anybody who's not new, which should include everybody, please feel free to come by and talk to your friendly Texas NORML board members if you want to get more involved, if you want to find out about the events that we're having. We're going to be discussing some of those from up here on stage as well, but please, we're, as you might imagine, given our mission, we are a super friendly group of people to be around. We don't bite, so come up and talk to us after the meeting. We're happy to chat. All right. Oh, and of course, as always, let's give a round of applause for Angela and Flamingo Cantina for hosting us for so long that I can't remember how long it's been, but it's been years and years and years and years and years now that she's here. Lets us come here the first Wednesday of every month, and hopefully you guys will come back next month and invite your friends. All right, so it's lawyer night at Texas NORML. As I said, I'm legal counsel. I'm going to be speaking a little bit about reasonable suspicion, probable cause, search and seizure, and then I'm going to narrow that down a little bit tonight because you could probably take 3 years of law school on just those issues alone. I'm going to relate them to some specific situations. I'm going to throw a question out. Who wants to take a guess as to what my possession of marijuana clients are typically doing? And I don't mean holding a bag of marijuana or smoking pot. I mean, what besides being potentially in possession of marijuana are they doing at the time that they get stopped, investigated, searched, and either cited or arrested for driving? I heard a couple of drivings. That's exactly right. Tonight we're actually going to talk a little bit about passenger rights. They are different than the rights of the driver. There's both good and bad in that. I'm going to give maybe some advice about that as well. No, not maybe. I am going to give some advice about that. So tonight, yeah, we're going to do about 30 minutes of law school on those topics. But as I said, Les is going to be speaking to us about membership. Major David Bass, who is our Director of Veterans Outreach, is here tonight. He's going to speak about some upcoming seminars and also something going on in New Braunfels that y'all may want to know about. And almost always, it seems like, we have our Executive Director here to speak to y'all as well. She kind of has a full plate tonight. She's not just going to be telling y'all about upcoming events, but also the Texas Marijuana Policy Conference, which was uber successful this weekend. Let's have a shout out to all the folks that put that on. The coalition was involved in that, lots of different organizations, lots of different sponsors, tons of great speakers. I saw several of them. Very enjoyable, extremely professional. I just really have never been prouder of our local marijuana movement than I was at the policy conference this weekend. So, oh, and also some interesting things happening at the Austin City Council she's going to cover. She was at a city council meeting yesterday. She's going to cover some of that. Okay. Now, a little bit later, I'm going to actually read you some selected portions of probable cause affidavits and offense reports with names redacted, of course. I won't be using names, but these will be actual examples of folks that are driving. There are passengers involved as well, and they get into various types of trouble depending on what the situation is. We're going to discuss a little bit about what the legal rights of the passengers were in those cases, maybe what they could have done differently other than stay at home. Always a good one, by the way. But before I get to that, I've got a word of warning. Yes, I'm going to be discussing these actual cases. I'm going to be discussing what your legal rights are in that situation. And I want to put this in the correct context. I hope it's not you in the future, but if it is you out on the side of the road with the police officer and he says, I am going to search your car now or whatever, he's the guy with the gun and the handcuffs. He's going to do whatever he wants to do. For Pete's sake, don't say, I saw some lawyer at a meeting tell me that you can't do that. It's going to be counterproductive to do that at best. Just be polite and cooperative at the scene. Let your lawyer figure it out later. And by the way, just to make sure that I didn't miss that, can anybody over here tell me what I put in super bold? Not kidding. I am not kidding about that. Be polite and cooperative. I can't tell you how many times I've had a client who maybe the prosecutor wasn't inclined necessarily to be as harsh as they possibly could. And when I point out how polite and cooperative my client was out on the scene, that's something that helps me help you in your case. Okay, enough about that. So, some legal background here. Before the state can convict you of a drug offense, almost any offense, but really I want to be limiting this to situations where somebody is stopped in a vehicle and it's an offense that the police officer is claiming that he saw in his presence or view. If you wonder why I'm talking about that, they need some of these things, for example, in a murder case, but that's not necessarily something that they saw within their presence or view. So let's think about it in terms of you're driving down the street. Eventually, and I'm skipping a couple of things here, you get arrested or cited, but one way or another charged with possession of marijuana. There are two things that the state is going to have to prove before they even get to try to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you were in possession of marijuana. And if they can't prove either one of these things, it's not an or. They have to prove both of these things before they even get to the substance of the case. Those two things are reasonable suspicion and probable cause. Those don't necessarily have anything to do with the eventual marijuana charge that my hypothetical client in this scenario is being charged with. So reasonable suspicion is a legal standard of proof in the United States that is less than probable cause. It's the legal standard for arrests and warrants. It's the same for those. But it's got to be more than a hunch. It must be based on specific and articulable facts, and taken together with rational inferences from those facts. The suspicion of the criminal activity must then be associated with the particular individual that gets targeted by the police. Now, I think maybe this is an easy one, but of course, what is it in the example that I'm talking about, my client driving down the street, what is it that's most often going to give the police reasonable suspicion? So I'm talking about the smell, not bad, not correct, but not a bad guess. I'm talking about you're driving 60 miles an hour, the cop is say it again? Traffic violation, that's right. It's going to start with the traffic violation. So even Class C traffic violations, even plain old speeding that no one really cares a whole lot about, even not using your turn signal, those are criminal offenses. You may not consider yourself a criminal when you do those things or when you get caught doing those things, but those are crimes. They're not civil penalties, they're criminal penalties. So reasonable suspicion in these cases is usually pretty easy. Now, there are definitely times, and I've got one here, it's my third PC that I'm going to read to you, where you don't even need to be a lawyer, in my opinion. You don't even need 5 minutes of law school to know, goodness gracious, that does not sound like a legitimate reason for a police officer to pull somebody over. And we're going to have an example of one of those tonight. But typically, reasonable suspicion in a traffic case is just going to be the police officer alleging that they saw the traffic violation. Now, once they have that reasonable suspicion, when they turn on the red and blues, they have detained you. And if they have some reason to believe that you're armed or dangerous or that they need to do it for their own safety, they can get you out of the car and frisk you. Now, when we talk about police officers actually putting their hands on you, of course, we're getting a little closer to them saying, what is that in your pocket? Is that something you won at a Texas NORML open meeting raffle? Maybe that gives me cause to go further. So don't have that in your pocket either, by the way. But so one good thing that I will note is this. I started practicing in 1997, and way fewer, I don't know the exact number, but way fewer than 50% of police vehicles were equipped with a camera. And nowadays, we have cameras everywhere. I love cameras. The reason I love cameras is it really limits the police as to what they can say. Back in the bad old days, you might think that, if you actually are potentially committing a crime, it's bad to have a camera on you at the time. I would prefer it because at least we know that it's something that actually happened, and sometimes we can actually fight these things just based on what we see on the video. So don't forget, if you're out there, you're probably on camera. Another good reason to be, that helps me prove to the prosecutor how polite you were to them. All right. So the law acts as if there's something called a reasonable person or a reasonable officer standard. And we're going to get to the Fourth Amendment in a little bit, but that comes from the requirement in the Fourth Amendment that searches and seizures be reasonable. This leaves a ton of discretion for appellate courts, state Supreme Courts, federal appellate courts, and even the United States Supreme Court to come up with their idea of what is and what isn't reasonable. And this is kind of where we see these cases breaking down sometimes. So the first part is reasonable suspicion. The next thing that they have to prove is not just that they had a reason to get in your business in the first place. In theory, they could arrest you for most traffic violations. Little known fact, they can't arrest you for speeding if that's the only traffic violation that you're committing and you're not going too far over the speed limit. But as a general rule, they're not going to arrest you for a traffic violation. So what is this probable cause to arrest standard? Well, this is the standard that I talked about, that if they wanted to, for example, remember talking about murder, if they thought that you were guilty of murder, but they didn't see it committed within their presence or view, they couldn't just arrest you on the spot. They would have to go to a magistrate, a judge first, and try to convince that judge that all the facts that they had adduced during their investigation that led them to believe that you were the person that committed this offense, that would be in their warrant application. It would be a probable cause affidavit for warrant of arrest and detention. And I certainly hope that for super serious crimes like murder, judges take these pretty seriously. And I think that our Austin judiciary does a pretty darn good job of being serious when they're reviewing these types of affidavits. But I've been sitting down in the basement over at the Travis County Jail in a judge's office and been chatting with a judge who was sort of skimming through different warrant applications and also chatting to me at the same time. And I'm not always certain that the amount of scrutiny is given to these things that should be. So now, for the math nerds out there, and I'm one of you, by the way, if you are a math nerd, you would think that probable cause means that they have to have at least 50%. If something is probable, that means there's more than a 50% chance that it's true, right? That's the layperson's definition of probable. Here's two possibilities. If one of them is more probable than the other, it's over 50%. Well, guess what? They've never attached a particular percentage, nor do I think they should, to what probable cause means. I don't think that would particularly make sense, but it's extremely clear from the case law that it's well less than 50%. It's more than reasonable suspicion, whatever that is, but it's less than 50%. So back to the math nerds, yes. Probable cause, probably not, can be probable cause. That's how sort of malleable this standard is under current U.S. law. And you know, I mentioned the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, that means in my physical person, the right to be secure from a police officer or anybody sticking their hand in my pants and figuring out what I have in there, to be secure in their persons, their houses, their papers, and their effects. That just means your documents and all the rest of your stuff, against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. For our portion, again, for tonight's 30-minute law school, we're looking at the phrase in there that talks about the prohibition against unreasonable searches and seizures. And that's why the courts have tried to come up with that is the law of the land. The Fourth Amendment is the law of the land. And so, since we don't have precise definitions, the courts have to struggle with what is reasonable and what is not. All right, so to recap so far, reasonable suspicion just means they have to have good legal cause to get in your business in the first place. And probable cause means they have to have a little bit more than that to arrest you for a particular offense. All right. At this point, I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to bring up Les Weiler. And membership director. I can barely remember my own title half the time. He's going to talk to us about membership for a little bit. Please welcome Les Weiler to the stage. Thank you.
All right, so let me get that show of hands again. Who's the first time at a meeting? All right. So I've been in Texas my entire life. I figure most of y'all probably have too. It's a giant state. If you're here, it's hard to get out. Director, some of the stuff I'm working on is trying to figure out ways that we can get tiny wins over this. So if you've got people that don't live in a city that's doing some kind of deferred program or not arresting or not prosecuting hemp, I want to try to figure out a program where we can start showing people how to call their DA, how to get on their county and stop this shit, change their budget and starve these programs, and show the legislators next session that their hometowns have changed. So if you have any interest in helping me do that, email me at members@texasnormal.org or go on the website, make sure you join, tell your friends we're trying to do something here, because honestly, I love Jamie, but I never want to have to sweat weed in that complicated of a legalese ever again. I mean, Texas has complicated enough blue laws for alcohol. Like, pot should not require 30 minutes of law school fucking ever. So tell all your friends, tell all your family, go on the website, and let's get this done. All right?
Thank you, Les. And one other word about membership. There are several different levels. If you become a member at the Freedom Fighter level, and if you are then, unfortunately, arrested or charged with a misdemeanor marijuana offense in Travis County, I will defend you for free. I've made that offer for many years. Travis County, actually, thank you. There's more coming. Hang on. Travis County has effectively moved to a why don't you just go get your own damn marijuana case dismissed without a lawyer process, which is awesome. Really briefly, if you're issued a citation in Travis County for possession of marijuana, what's probably going to happen is, number one, you will be sent to Justice of the Peace number 5, and number two, my understanding is that potentially in 100% of those cases now, they say to you, okay, this is the booking process. Remember how we didn't throw you in jail and arrest you? This is going to be the substitute for the booking process, but we want to substitute that for something even better. Why don't we just reset your case for a month? You come back with this silly little certificate saying that you've now done a 4-hour class. It used to be an 8-hour class. We'll just dismiss your case outright without even filing it in the first place, and you won't need an expunction. So it's fantastic that Travis County does that, but it makes my offer to the freedom fighters less necessary. So it now extends to state jail felonies as well. That would be state jail felony THC, like vape pen cases, or marijuana 4 ounces to 5 pounds. If you are a Texas NORML member at the time of the charge or the arrest, a freedom fighter member, did I say that part? Then I will defend you on the state jail Travis County charge as well if it's marijuana or THC related. So you can, I'm not selling it because I'm not getting money, but I can't verbally sell that to you as insurance, but I can't stop you from thinking about it as insurance if that's what you want to think about it as, because that's effectively what it is. All right, so that's another perk to membership. All right. So I just told our next speaker, he's not coming up quite yet, that the words on this page sure looked a lot bigger to my old pair of eyes when I was in my office with bright lights. But I want to read you a portion of this particular police report. On such and such a date, I, Corporal so-and-so, stopped a white Hyundai displaying a license plate going 84 and a 75. The driver was identified as driver. The right front passenger was identified as passenger. There was a strong odor of marijuana emitting from inside the vehicle. A PC search revealed more than a user amount, but less than 2 ounces of marijuana, along with a marijuana grinder. Driver admitted to the grinder as well as the marijuana. Passenger also admitted to the marijuana. Altogether, the marijuana weighed approximately 8.7 grams. Both were cited for possession of marijuana less than 2 ounces, misdemeanor B. All right, first off, a little bit off topic, but in noticing that it says, and by the way, I did not represent, and we'll get to that, I did not represent this person on this particular charge. We'll talk about how I got involved in it in a little bit. A PC search revealed more than a user amount. Initially, I thought that the police officer was trying to claim that 8 grams, that possession of 8 grams of marijuana meant that that couldn't possibly be for personal use and that you must be distributing it. But I think it may be that what the trooper meant was that it's a usable amount, because in theory in Texas, if you have, the law actually says it has to be, that there's a low end, and that low end is it has to at least be a usable amount. Texas has never defined exactly what that is. All right. Say that again? So that's an interesting thing. Let's talk about it. Can you get busted for a seed? Well, when anybody says, in fact, a lot of people will come up to me and say, hey, I had a friend who did XYZ, and he was arrested for it. Can you be arrested for XYZ? And I always want to say, well, I mean, you just told me he got arrested for XYZ. I think what you mean is, how easy is it going to be for the defense lawyer to come in and somehow get that case flushed down the toilet? There's a very specific definition of marijuana in Texas. The non-germinable stems and seeds are excluded from the definition of illegal marijuana in terms of the weight, because depending on how much weight you have is going to determine the penalty, how high the penalty is. So the answer there would be, I suppose it would depend on whether the seed was germinable, but typically the seeds that you're going to see in a baggie of pot or whatever are probably not. So I don't know if that kind of addresses your point on that. All right, on such and such a date at such time, I was stationary monitoring eastbound traffic when I observed and confirmed with front radar a white car traveling 84 in a 75-mile-an-hour zone in the left lane. Remember, we just talked about reasonable suspicion. There you go. In this case, they've obviously got reasonable suspicion. It's a traffic stop. I activated my emergency lights. I'm skipping some stuff here. I made a driver's side approach and advised the occupants why they were stopped, asked for driver's license and insurance. Listen to this next one. I detected a strong odor of hydro marijuana emitting from inside the vehicle. Man, I would love to cross-examine this trooper about this and about where he acquired his expertise that he can tell the difference by smell of marijuana that was grown in soil or grown in water. I suspect that if he didn't admit to being a complete and utter liar on the stand, he would have to say, it's from my decades of experience growing marijuana both ways, and they have a distinct difference. I'm not making this up. I almost choked when I saw that. But wait, it gets better, because how can you really tell where the smell is coming from? The wind was blowing from behind me, so I went to the right front passenger window where the wind would be blowing towards my face. I could still smell hydro marijuana. All right, well, I guess it's coming from the car. The driver advised the vehicle was a rental. I asked the driver to step out of her vehicle. I asked if they were smoking weed. Driver advised no, sir. Driver advised there was weed inside the vehicle. I told her to retrieve it. We walked to the right front passenger door. I observed the right front passenger reaching down between the door and her seat. However, the driver got the item first. The driver handed me a brown paper wrap with hydro marijuana inside, as if they were just rolling a blunt. I don't know what that one means either. I don't know how the method in which I keep my marijuana in whatever baggie or container I have, I don't know how that tells you how recently I rolled a joint, but I guess it does. I'm not a cop. Again, it's years of experience. That's probably right. The right front passenger was identified as Jamie's eventual client. Here's a good one. The rear passenger, who was the mother to the passenger, was identified as so-and-so. I advised all three subjects that I was going to search the vehicle and asked if they had anything they wanted to volunteer. Jamie's eventual client advised the marijuana container was on the back seat. All right. So pretty much from beginning to end, other than the making stuff up, and if I had represented this person on the initial charge for possession of marijuana, it's actually in a county that is not easy on marijuana cases. Hopefully it's something that I would have been able to use to convince the prosecutors that they should dismiss the case. Unfortunately, what actually happened was this. I had represented this young woman, the passenger, in the past, and she called me up about 4, 5, 6 weeks after this arrest, and she said, by the way, she was on probation in Travis County at the time for a different offense when this happened. She calls me up about 6 weeks after the arrest, and she says, I got charged with possession of marijuana in yada yada county about a month and a half ago, And yesterday, I went to court and pleaded guilty and was placed on 1-year probation, which I don't hear a big grunt from the audience, but it's all I can do to keep myself when I'm on the phone from saying, "Why didn't you call me 2 days ago?" Sometimes you need a lawyer. You don't in Travis County, but sometimes you need a lawyer, so don't do that. So I became her lawyer because what happened to her on the Travis County case? They filed a motion to revoke probation that she was on because she just pleaded guilty to another criminal offense. Fortunately, I was able to, the judges around here are as reasonable as the prosecutors when it comes to these cases, and I was able to convince the judge that since she had effectively been overpunished by having to take this probation for the marijuana case out of county, that should be her only spanking, and she shouldn't get anything additional after that. But in terms of the 30-minute law school for tonight, here's a passenger who it's clear that the police have the right to get her out of the vehicle. Just the fact that driver said to cop away from the car, passenger is also involved in the criminal activity, is probably going to give the police officer the probable cause required to search my eventual client, find any marijuana that they had on them, and those sorts of things, right? Remember, the police officer does not out on the street have to somehow convene a jury and convict this person beyond a reasonable doubt prior to searching them. This is just sort of a plain Jane case where, and here's where the advice portion comes in, you could say a little less about it being your marijuana, both if you were the driver and the passenger and you wanted to be my client and make it easy on me. But at any rate, that's example number one. I'm splitting it up tonight with 3 speakers, so we're going to go with speaker number 2 at this point. David Bass is our Director of Veterans Outreach. I believe I got that correct, did I? Please give him a round of applause. He's going to talk to us about some veterans issues. Thank you.
My name is David Bass. I'm the Director of Veterans Outreach for Texas NORML, and I refuse to obey the unjust laws of Texas against me possessing and using marijuana. And if you too refuse to obey these unjust laws, please turn to your neighbor and say, "I refuse to obey these unjust laws." Now, that doesn't come without risk. I'm not going to ask him to stand up, but we have a person with us tonight, and I introduced him to Jamie, and Jamie's going to take his case. But this person was driving on 195. Down there by Sun City. We have Sun City in the house right back there. And as you know, if you drive 195, which I have drove 10,000 times and will probably drive 10,000 more times, you will see DPS on this side. You will see DPS coming back from Austin. You'll see DPS on this side. You'll see DPS on the other side. Then you'll see a sheriff, and then you'll see the Florence cop, and then you'll see another DPS, and then when you get to Killeen city limits, you'll see a Killeen cop. So you run the gauntlet every time, am I right? And in my personal opinion, I could be wrong. I mean, this is Texas. How could something like this happen in Texas? My opinion is that the police racially profile people on 195. I know, it's hard to believe, man, because I take mental note for every, like I said, I've drove 195 10,000 times in my truck and on my motorcycle, and I make mental note of who it is that's pulled over every time I see somebody pulled over on 195. And I'm telling you, either black males and Hispanic males are engaged in a lot of criminal activity along 195, or they're getting racially profiled. You decide for yourself which is true. But this young man is a construction worker, and he was driving on 195, and he got pulled over for an extremely minor traffic violation. I can't remember what it was, but it's at the level of, hey, you didn't use your blinker to change lanes. And the police officer detained him for 30 minutes, waiting for the K-9 to get there. And then he arrested him. And in my opinion, based on my short conversation, there was no probable cause for that to happen. So it's one thing for us to refuse to obey the unjust laws, but we have to understand in Texas that what we're engaging in is civil disobedience, and it's a dangerous thing that we're doing in Texas. So we have to listen to Jamie and use common sense and really think about what we're doing when we decide that we're not going to obey the unjust laws of Texas. We have this fantastic cross-section of Texans here with us tonight, if you look around. We have Bill Norton, who founded Texas NORML in 1973 over at the University of Texas. We have a brand new couple over here. I don't mean to embarrass y'all, but they just moved here from Corpus Christi to Austin, so you come over here and welcome them to Austin and become their friends. Let them know they're among friends here. We have a retired lieutenant colonel that spent 30 years in the Army in the military medical field, and his name is Joseph, and he's sitting right here, and I'm so happy because Joseph is going to be able to go up to the Capitol and walk into those offices and say, I'm a retired lieutenant colonel, I spent 30 years in the Army, and you need to change the laws of Texas. Don't call me a stoner or I'll kick your ass right now. So Joseph is legit. If you're a veteran, please stand up tonight so we can recognize you, all of our veterans. Thank you. Thank you for serving. Thank you. And we are starting a new outreach program. After we were up at the Capitol this year, and every year the police officers have this gigantic press conference. And they get up there for 30 minutes and tell 30 minutes worth of lies every year. And all the press is there writing down those lies. So, and then when we testify in front of the committee, the police officers show up in uniform, on department time, driving a vehicle that we, the taxpayers, are paying the gas for, so they can come to the Capitol and testify against us. And as a courtesy, our legislators always allow the uniformed police officers to testify first. So they get the first punch, and they get up there and tell their lies. And so next session, if this works out, at the Capitol, when the police officers have their big press conference at the Capitol and tell all their lies, we're going to have a press conference with our former law enforcement officers to tell the truth. Because the fact is, what our police officers go through is the same as our veterans, and the same as our EMTs, and the same as our firemen and fire ladies. Firemen? Former? Okay. So if you are a former police officer, EMT, fireman, or what was the other one I said? Former police officer, firemen, EMT, veterans. So if you're the first three, please stand up so we can recognize you tonight. Thank you. Because police officers and these service personnel, they deal with PTSD too, from their experiences. And they deal with chronic pain from their injuries, from their heroic actions when they were on duty. And so we're reaching out. This is Phil Jarrow right here. And Phil is number 1 of our former police officer outreach. And at the marijuana policy conference, I met police officer number 2, and Phil checked this officer out and talked to her, and we believe she's good to go. She's a military veteran and a 22-year police officer, and she's getting ready to retire, and she wants to be on our team. And she has a tattoo on her arm, and she has the marijuana leaf disguised in it. So I met her at the Texas Marijuana Policy Conference, and I would like to thank Heather Fazio, who's right up there, and Jax Finkel for putting on the greatest conference about marijuana in the history of the state of Texas. That conference moved us to an entirely new level of professionalism and reputation and knowledge. That was a fantastic event. And I met I networked for 3 straight days. Every day I got home in my suit jacket, I pulled out a stack of cards and notes. And so there was an amazing group of people there. And I met brand new veterans, which was wonderful. This is Dave Winnicky. It is his birthday, and I would like us all to say happy birthday, Dave. Me and Dave joined the Texas NORML Board on the same time, the same night, the same place, so we've been fighting together ever since. We're in the same foxhole. All right, so we veterans are going to march in the New Braunfels Veterans Day Parade on September the 9th. Details to follow. You are welcome to come march with the veterans at the New Braunfels Veterans Day. November the 9th, thank you. I always look to Jax because she'll let us know when we're off track. November the 9th. Come march with us in the New Braunfels Veterans Day Parade. That is Senator Campbell's district. And we hope that Senator Campbell will be in the parade, and we're marching right behind her with our Texas Veterans for Medical Marijuana banner, okay? That's my dream. And then our 3 main events, we're going to do 3 veteran medical marijuana seminars. We're going to do 1 in Senator Campbell's district down in New Braunfels, date to be announced. We're going to do a Veterans Medical Marijuana Seminar in Representative Stephanie Click's district in Dallas, dates to be announced. And we're going to do a Veterans Medical Marijuana Seminar in Senator Brian Birdwell's district in Waco, tentative date September the 8th. February the 8th. Thank you. I got September in my head. February the 8th. And our goal is to have it at the Texas Ranger Museum, which is perfect. It's right there by I-35. And as Jason and I discovered when we reconned Texas Ranger Museum, when you go there, be sure and go look at the marijuana display at the Texas Ranger Museum and try to decipher why the Texas Rangers have marijuana classified as contraband, with some really, plants and really cool pipes that they've confiscated, right next to the murder weapon display. So we're like, man, look at this. You got marijuana and a sawed-off shotgun side by side. I think that was all I was going to say. So thank you for being here. We will continue to obey these unjust laws until the legislators listen to us and legalize marijuana in Texas.
Thank you so much, Dave. All right, I'm going to put 30-Minute Law School on a little bit of fast forward because, as tends to happen when I get up here, time flies. So how does what I was talking about before relate to passengers? Because I said I was going to try to make tonight passenger night. Well, there's a legal concept called standing, and you have to understand that first, understand the case law and your legal rights when it comes to you being a driver versus you being a a passenger. Well, what is standing? It basically asks the question, do you have the right to complain about this in a court? Here's what I mean. If Bob cheats Mary out of $10,000, says that he'll pay her $10,000 for a certain, work that she's doing, and she does that, and she refuses, sorry, the guy's the bad guy, and he refuses to pay her in this particular example, well, Mary can go to civil court and sue Bob, right? Can I go to civil court if Mary doesn't want to and sue on Mary's behalf or somehow try to remedy this? The answer is no. I'm not affected by that. I don't have standing to sue. So that's the general concept of standing. And if you look at the history of car stops and drivers and passengers, what the government did for decades is they just claimed, well, the passenger doesn't have any kind of standing to sue about this in the first place. It would not matter how unreasonable, remember reasonable is that word in the Fourth Amendment that we're always looking at, it wouldn't matter how unreasonable the police officer's actions were, it might to the driver, says the government, but the passenger has no right to complain about this. And that really kind of continued for quite some time. In the 70s, there was a case where there was a getaway car in a robbery, and the passenger had a pretrial hearing about whether or not the evidence could be used against him. And to make a long story short, he was eventually convicted, so obviously the trial court said that it wasn't a problem. Eventually, that case went to the Supreme Court. That was one where they changed the legal framework in which they looked at it. They started talking about people having a legitimate expectation of privacy in something, and that would relate to whether or not they had standing to complain about it. In this particular case, they upheld the conviction. Some of the contraband was in the glove compartment, and they said that a passenger doesn't necessarily have standing to complain about the police going through somebody else's glove compartment. I actually don't necessarily think that that's wrong. Where it evolved, though, was this. It was an open question until the 2000s as to whether or not passengers, the theory before this was that because the driver was being stopped, they were just free to leave. They could just walk away, and therefore they weren't under any kind of governmental interference. That was one of the reasons that the government used. Eventually, the Supreme Court got closer to getting it right and basically said that passengers could complain if they were convicted and something had happened. It's not a totally dry desert for them. Was that a question down here that we had from somebody? No. Did you say yes or no? No. Okay. All right. Let me do this. I'm probably not, I said I was going to read 3 examples. I'm going to skip the second one because the third one's my favorite. Because we are running a little bit low on time, I'm going to ask Jax to come up. She's our executive director. She's going to talk to us about the Austin City Council meeting and the Texas Marijuana Policy Conference this weekend. Please welcome Jax Finkel to the stage.
Also, this is officially your last reminder to sign up for the raffle because when I'm done talking, we're going to be giving away stuff. All right, so we had a really great conference, which Dave talked about. We have a lot of volunteers and speakers here in the audience, so thank all of y'all for joining us. It was a really good Labor Day weekend. We labored for justice, and that was awesome. And then I woke up on Tuesday and prepared some testimony for the Austin City Council Judicial Committee. So as we've talked about before, because of HB 1325 legalizing hemp, which is statutorily defined as 0.3% THC or less, it has caused problems with charges and testing because you have to prove what the percentage is to prove if it's legal or illegal, because arguably you cannot tell the difference between hemp and marijuana in many cases unless you have a mass spectrometer of some sort. So they had Assistant Chief Gay come and give a discourse and a presentation about their concerns. Basically, APD's stance was that marijuana is illegal, so they are going to continue arresting, but they have not increased their enforcement efforts. However, they continue to use cite and summons or arrest for possession of marijuana. I'll get into that a little bit more. APD believes that a non-enforcement position with no sanctions, which is a fancy way of saying not arresting people for marijuana, would actually increase violent crime. And further, they stated that most of the murders involve some sort of drug deal, likely marijuana. I'm not kidding. The chair, however, of the committee later said that the numbers that they offered to try to correlate marijuana possession to murders was not statistically relevant. That's a quote. Not statistically relevant to draw conclusions with. APD is currently working on a fix for this testing. They think that they'll have it within the next 6 months. So this meeting is for Austin City Council to determine if they want this to be a budgetary item. So there were about 10 to a dozen people there to offer testimony. Paul Quincy was one of them, and he actually talked about the issues that have arisen with probable cause, because hemp smells like marijuana, and that's a legal thing. So do you now have probable cause? And APD said that they had put out a training bulletin, which I have not been able to see yet, which gives a way for people to deal with it. So they're saying that they're going to lean more into their cite and summons program, which they called robust. I don't want a program that saddles someone with a criminal consequence to be robust. Just saying, that's not my favorite thing. They also had people there to talk about the racial disparity in how people are arrested, especially in Austin. For those of you that don't know, about 8 to 9% of Austin's population are African American, and the assistant chief himself got up and offered these statistics. Now, I want to say that these are citation statistics, and I mentioned earlier that you can be part of the cite and summons program, which means that you jumped through or qualify whatever flaming hoops to participate, or you get arrested for possession. So here in Austin, it's basically you have to live in Travis County, and it has to be your first arrest for you to qualify. So these citation numbers deal with those that are lucky enough to have qualified for the citation program. This is where they cite you and summons. This is something Jamie was talking about. So in 2018, 627 people participated in the cite and summons program. Of that, 228 were black, 268 were Latino or Hispanic, 122 were white, 3 were Asian, 4 were Middle Eastern, and 2 were unknown. So after they sat there and talked about racial disparity, the assistant chief basically came up and confirmed it with numbers. He then offered year-to-date numbers for 2019. So far this year, from January 1 to the date of that hearing, which was yesterday, 9/3, a total of 290 people have participated in the cite and summons program. 106 were black, 130 were Hispanic or Latino, 52 white, 1 Asian, 0 Middle Eastern, and 1 unknown. So racial disparity is clear in the cite and summons program, and if we were also to get the arrest numbers for the city, I'm sure that that would also carry through there. I was there to discuss polling, the popularity of not arresting people for the possession of marijuana, and I offered them both the UT Texas Tribune poll from 2018, but also the Emerson poll from this year, I think it was April of this year. I also discussed how it's become a campaign issue. There are, all of the legislators in the Austin city limits have either authored, co-sponsored, voted for, or in some manner supported marijuana law reform. In fact, where I live, my representative used to be the worst prohibitionist, and it got flipped to someone who was positive and writing bills on this. So this is something that the people of Austin really support. And it's going to cost quite a note to get this testing implemented. Now, they do have a gas mass spectrometer that they use to test their opioids and their K2 for their felony cases. But they're needing more if they're going to also be testing all of these additional cases, potentially, several thousand cases for possession of marijuana. So it's a failed policy, it's not popular, and on top of that, there was bipartisan supermajority in the House that voted to change the law. I also talked about the platforms on both of the parties and how actually Texas GOP delegates by 80% approved a platform that says that they want an ounce or less to just basically be a $100 civil fine, and that's it. So it was a good meeting. They didn't come to a resolution, but at the end, I'll definitely say the chair did not seem inclined to be spending money on testing marijuana for THC instead of money for testing rape kits for actual violent crime and increasing clearance rate on the other crimes here in Austin. So I'm hopeful that they will choose to make this a non-arrestable offense, but we will see what happens. They'll be working on their budget over the next week and a half, and then perhaps there will be some sort of resolution if we're lucky. So Les was talking about earlier, our membership director engaging at the local level during the interim. This is how we create allies and more ammunition to go up to the Capitol. If we can get multiple cities doing ordinance like this, it just gives us more impetus to have a statewide policy. We already had the argument that it was an awful patchwork of policy, but now it's even more because if you live in Austin city limits, they don't want you to be arrested, but there's part of Austin city limits that's in Williamson County, right? And then there's parts of that that's unincorporated. And so it makes an even smaller quilted patchwork for us to deal with. So I just wanted to give you all an update on that. I appreciate y'all being here. If you wanted to watch it in full, you can go to our YouTube channel. It's been uploaded there, and you can listen to what the chief had to say and what all of the different members who offered testimony had to say. So on that note, I will turn it back over to Jamie. The raffle? Boo! Hello! Sorry, you guys. Brain farted. Thanks. It's that kind of night. All right, so let me get this bag out real quick. This fan is kicking it. Whew. All right, so what's inside this bag right now is a Grav Lab prototype. It is a one-of-a-kind piece from Grav that they have donated to us. It is a really cool little offset like a smoking pipe type of thing. And the winner also is going to get some Willie Nelson coffee, and it is Mike. Hi, Mike, you win. Awesome. Ta-da. Betty, don't go nowhere. Betty, come back. I got a second thing. Congratulations, Mike. I brought one more little tiny pebble green worry stone Grav Lab item for someone to win. So one more, here we go. The winner is Rachel. Congratulations, where'd she go? Okay, I'll bring it to you, Rachel. Okay, now we'll turn it over to Jamie.
Okay, folks, thank you, Jax. So I said I was going to read 3 different examples of probable cause affidavits and offense reports, but I don't have time to do that. If I were sticking to the plan and really focusing on the passenger one, you remember my first example was one where things kind of all went downhill for the passenger. The second one would have been one where I think that there was an extremely valid defense. It was actually one that was sent to me by a friend of mine who called me and said, hey, what do you think about this? Did they violate the passenger's rights? And based on our conversation and her exploring the case law, she was able to get a felony dismissed outright for a class alone, so that's good to know. I could go on about all of that, but example number 3 is one of the favorite things that I've ever read in my entire life. And I can't show this to y'all because it has names on it, attorney-client privilege and all of that, but I did again when I was off stage, I talked with David Bass, and I got him to verify for me that this actually does say Austin Police Department and is a page of an actual arrest report that was written by a police officer. The reason I say all of that is I think despite the fact that I've laid that groundwork, I think maybe 50% of the people in this room are going to think that what I'm reading is not real and that it's a joke. Remember, we were talking about reasonable suspicion. A reason to get in your business in the first place, right? So this is a particular Austin Police Department officer's attempt to justify his stopping a particular vehicle. I'm so-and-so at such and such a date in 2013. That's how great this is. I've saved it that long. I was monitoring vehicular traffic. I observed a white Chevy Malibu traveling northbound on the number 3 lane. This vehicle perked my interest due to the fact that it was an older model vehicle, was extremely clean, had no tint, and had temporary plates. Well, that sounds like a... Wait, he's going to explain to you why all of these are just really terrible things. Through my training and experience, I have learned that drug couriers will use older model vehicles for the transport of narcotics. That way, if they were to be intercepted, they would not lose out on an expensive vehicle. So, driving an... he watches The Wire. Yeah. All right, well... The fact that the vehicle was clean is another indicator of a possible drug courier because the courier is attempting to subconsciously wash away their sins, i.e. fingerprints. I told y'all weren't going to believe it. I can't show you the whole thing, but I'll show you the top of it that says Austin Police Department report. But wait, that's not all. There's more. And the fact that the vehicle had no tint. Raise your hand if your vehicle has tint. Okay, that's like fewer than 10 people in this whole bar. All right, well, the rest of y'all are criminals, but let me explain to you why. And the fact that the vehicle had no tint is also another indicator because the drug courier is attempting to give the impression that they have nothing. Sorry. The drug courier is attempting to give the impression that they have nothing to hide. It makes sense. Also, we're not done. Also, the fact that the vehicle had a temporary plate is another indicator because many drug couriers will renew registrations so as to have no law enforcement history on any old license plates. Lastly, the fact that the vehicle was driving in the number 3 lane is a tactic commonly used by drug couriers so as to make themselves out to be law-abiding citizens and trying to indicate to law enforcement that they are not breaking any laws, i.e. speeding. So, not speeding is an indicator that you're a drug courier because you're trying to hide the fact that you're not a criminal, and as we talked about before, speeding is a crime. In case you're wondering, the answer is yes, this case was dismissed outright. And that's why it's my favorite probable cause affidavit all the time. We have a question down here. For all of that, I just told you. He's clearly a drug courier, Mike. You were not listening. And by the way, if you really need a punchline, no drugs found, arrested for driving while license suspended. So he got a big fish there, didn't he? Yeah, all those theories. And even after knowing there were no drugs in the vehicle, you expect the cop to say that after he finds 2 tons of cocaine in the back seat, right? Nope. Driving while license suspended, which is either a traffic ticket or a glorified traffic ticket. At any rate, that's my time for tonight. Appreciate y'all all coming out for our open meeting. Please check the website, find out about all our upcoming events. And once again, thanks to Flamingo Cantina. We will see you guys next month. All right, good night.